This is Open Source from PRI, the blog with a radio show. You can talk about upcoming shows or pitch one of your own at radioopensource.org.
Support for this public radio podcast comes from Acura, featuring the all-new 240-horsepower turbocharged Acura RDX. More at acura.com/RDX.
From Public Radio International, I'm Christopher Lydon. This is Open Source. Christopher Hitchens' book-length diatribes in the past have taken aim at mere mortals, Henry Kissinger to Mother Teresa. But the Lord of Creation, the big guy himself, is in Hitchens' sights now, and the book trade is doing flips for his new title. God is not great, it avows, with the subtitle, Religion Poisons Everything. God is the fake father, the human excuse for tribalism and war, the argument goes. Religion is the flight from man's best bets, reason and science. Hitchens' hot book may be the cleverest, even funniest of the recent little slew of bestsellers against God. But in a bigger picture of churchified politics in the U.S. and global warfare with bloody tints of jihad and crusade, Hitchens' tirade could stand for something bigger. And Habit, on our website, says its potency marks a semi-latent, late Reformation urge to reinvent a sore subject before it kills us. Hitchens V God is next on Open Source. I'm Christopher Lydon. This is Open Source, the radio tip of an articulate iceberg of listeners who write at radioopensource.org. They write about God, and they write with conviction and wit, for and against. In the context of our guest Christopher Hitchens' pressing of all the pious buttons in his incendiary book, God is Not Great, subtitled How Religion Poisons Everything. We know Christopher Hitchens as the English-American left-wing journalist, a contrarian who loves the war in Iraq, a long, short war, he called it at the outset. It's 4 years ago. On the matter of God is Not Great, Eddie Glaude, Jr., professor of religion at Princeton, is going to join the fray in good time. The subject is not just the book and its bite, but the why now question. Why the churchiest, most God-minded society in the Western world, ours, wants this Hitchens lashing as well. Get your dukes up and post your view at www.radioopensource.org. Christopher Hitchens, welcome to Open Source. You note toward
Very
the
nice
end...
of you to have me.
Thank you. Nice of you to be here. You note late in the book that you've been writing this book all your life. I wonder if you can just describe in personal terms what it is that's been boiling inside you all this time.
Well, I think it would be probably recognizable to a lot of your listeners if I was to say that the first intelligent dissent I was able to register when I was quite small was with the belief, as officially inculcated, that it was good to believe in God because otherwise you wouldn't know where morals came from. And it was good to believe in authority because authority was, buttressed by religion. And I think anyone who's capable of critical thinking at all, or if it comes to that, of any attention to any text that's put in front of them when they're young, in this case the Bible, will find that it's the beginning of all arguments. It's the beginning of all important disagreements. It's the foundation of thinking for yourself. And I wanted just to see if I could state that in now my declining years. In such a way as to lend a bit of tone, perhaps, and perhaps some encouragement to the number of people who I know, not just in this country but elsewhere, have about had enough of religious and clerical bullying and intimidation.
Listen, on our website, there's just volumes of evidence that people love these questions, and we all grow up chewing on them. I wanted to blow a little smoke your way by saying also that you are, if nothing else, a model of critical thinking, or at least you stand for it, which is not to say you're perfect about it, but questioning. Cannot a critical thinker end up being deeply sympathetic with religion and even waking up and praising God every day?
Well, I can think of one contemporary example, probably only one, but that I'm sure there'll be people who'll be able to improve on my knowledge with that. But, for example, someone I've admired as a writer and thinker all my life, Alistair MacIntyre, would roughly conform to that definition, yes. I can't think of another one living who I respect, but that's just probably my own inadequacy. Certainly, it is a pleasure to disagree with some kinds of religious mind and author. Pascal would be one, for example. I would say. Not Augustine, I don't admire him, or Aquinas, but C.S. Lewis, to my surprise, I exerted myself a bit more with him than I had before in writing the book, came across a couple of very interesting concessions that he makes that were very useful to me in making a couple of points that, at least I think, were dialectical.
But what about so many others? I mean, I would just throw out, to me, the best book writer this side of the Bible, Dostoevsky, a profoundly searching mind and in the last analysis, a great believer.
Yes, I make some use of him, particularly of the brothers Karamazov, in my book. There is the famous question asked there that, I think it is actually asked by Smerdyakov, who's one of the less moral figures in the brothers Karamazov, but he wants to know, without God, how would we have morality? Wouldn't everything be possible? Well, okay, everyone has to have an answer to that question. I actually do have one. I'll give it to you.
And
now,
so does Dostoevsky.
Get it out of the way.
Go for it.
Dostoevsky was, of course, a Russian Orthodox chauvinist in many ways, a great genius and probably a very great schizophrenic as well. But he was a Russian Orthodox chauvinist. He was an anti-Semite. He wished everyone in the world was under the sway of the Russian Orthodox Church. Doesn't make him any less good a novelist. To Smerdyakov's question, I've answered it like this. The question, in other words, how would we have morals without God?
If God is dead, is all permitted. Okay.
Right. I would say, well, now let's say of the my ancestors on my mother's side, of the tribe of which I'm a not particularly useful or distinguished member, but the ancient Jewish people, I don't believe a word of the story about them wandering in the Sinai, of course, but let's suppose the story to be true. Is it to be believed that they got all the way to the foot of Mount Sinai under the impression that murder and theft and perjury were okay, and that only when they got a divine instruction saying, look, have I got news for you, this is condemned by heaven, did they think, well, we better stop doing it then? Obviously not. Obviously, if they had thought murder and theft and perjury and other offences, I'm not bothering with the irrelevant bits of the Ten Commandments, but these three gross offences were all right, they'd never have got that far, no one would ever have heard of them. A human society wouldn't be possible without that. Take another point, related one from the next testament along, the parable of the Good Samaritan, so-called, told by the alleged Jesus of Nazareth. He's talking about someone who's, as far as we know, of no faith. He's not identified as having any faith at all. He just goes out of his way in order to help another suffering fellow human creature. Quite obviously he wasn't a Christian, otherwise Jesus wouldn't be telling the story before Christianity was founded, if you follow me. So
Jesus wasn't a Christian either, so...
Well, he probably wasn't. Certainly his disciples couldn't have been, because they hadn't read the New Testament. But you make a good point. Well, But my point is a fairly simple one. Religion is common to, morality, ethics, solidarity, as I prefer to call it, are innate in us and common to us, except for the large number of psychos who God has been pleased to make, who don't get the point about other people. But to say that we need supernatural permission for this, backed up in one case by a heavenly bribe and in the second case by a hellish punishment for reinforcement, seems to me to degrade what is instinctive in us and to deprive us of our self-respect in having an ethical character and being able to show that, yes, an ethical life can be lived without religion, whereas many appalling crimes could not be committed without it.
You've been angry about the pretenses of religion, as you said, all your life. I wonder, a couple of things I want to get at. One, personal, sort of what brought it out of you at this point, and secondly, what does it tell us that this thing has caught on in such a arresting way in this society at this moment? That's sort of the thematic question of the hour. Where are we going with this? Where are you going with it?
On the first point, I mean, I think